Go by the name of Residence. I'm a techno producer and I also DJ as well. And today we're going to be breaking down one of my tracks. We'll be starting from scratch, breaking down the entire track for you guys, how I process things, um, how we process things, best methods to do, what to look out for, certain tips and tricks for you guys. Um, and one moment, please. Yeah, and then yeah. So let's get started. Now, usually for techno, songs range anywhere from 3 minutes up to 7 to 9, even 10 maybe, depending on the track and who's producing it. Uh, so the main fundamentals we'll be going over real quick before we get started. We're gonna go over the kick drum. I'll lightly touch up on the rumble, but that can take a long time to really explain and really like get right. We'll go over the rolling bass, the percussions, harmonies, melodies, not special effects, but effects for transitions, as well as atmospheres and drones. So just a slight recommendation. I made sure that it wasn't too loud for everyone, but just in case that it is, you might want to just start off by lowering your volumes and then adjusting from there. But I made sure it wasn't too loud. So where we'll get started right now is obviously the kick drum. Now, when it comes to the kick drum, let me just there we go. When it comes to the kick drum, you can use loops where everything's already processed for you. You could create your own. There's a lot of methods behind creating your kick drum for your tracks. And just real quick, for an example, let me pull up. There we go. Here's this one. They're pre-made sample packs. There's a lot out there, some really good ones. You just got to keep your eye out, read the reviews. Personally, I like to make my own, because when you make your own kick drums and your rumbles and pretty much everything from scratch, you really have control over the entire process. So if you're creating a song and you're 80% of the way done, and then maybe your kick drum is a little bit too light or too strong, for someone who makes his own, they can easily go in, tweak it, done, out. Samples, usually they're already processed and done. You can do very little, and the issue with loops, which I have no issues, I've used them plenty of times, the problem is that they're already processed, and the problem, if you start processing them some more, you risk the potential of ruining it and even making it worse, unless you know what you're doing. I mean, like right here, there's this kick drum, perfect, no issues, hard hitting. The rumble's amazing. If you want to do a speed track and just throw it in there, or maybe you just want to use it as a reference, feel free. But for me, the way I do it, I could grab either a loop or a sample. And what I do is that, like you see here, I have pretty much 4 layers of kicks. You have your heavy hitters. This is like the thick of it, the meat of it, where you have pretty much all your low and sub in. And then what I do, then I have the mid-range right here. And then I also have the very high bits, just to kind of clear up the whole kick drum and to make sure it really stands out in the whole process. Very thin, you wouldn't notice it by itself, but once I start playing it and taking off each layer, you'll get a better idea of how each one really like complements one another. And the last one up here, this is more for groove. So basically what I do is I record out the kick drum, I filter it out, and then I just kind of create a groove to make the kicks a little bit more interesting. So if we play it all together, it sounds like this. So you heard that little groove kick right there, just to kind of give some variation. So if I take out maybe the high end, you see how it's like, it sounds muffled. Now it's way clearer. If I take out the mid, now just kind of missing a part. You have the high and the low, but it's kind of missing the body in the middle. So when you're working with your kick drums, really think about what you need. You could honestly just have one layer and make it sound amazing if you know the processing and what to do. And we'll go over right now what I kind of did in terms of how I processed. So basically I just started with a filter, remove the low end, remove any muddiness, and then I just ran a saturator. Ableton has its own. One of my favorite presets for the Ableton saturator is a bit warmer. It really, I use it almost every time on almost every layer that I use. It really brings out and complements whatever you're trying to clear up. It gives it a warm tone, but it's not harsh. It's very soft, it's very bright. I would highly recommend, if you guys new to Ableton, use the saturator, really learn it, because it can really bring out the life in your tracks. Once I brought the saturator in, I just did another EQ on the low end just to make sure. When it comes to any kind of processing you guys do on your samples or on your melodies, anytime you add effects like distortion or compression or saturation, it actually does boost up the low end. Even though you EQ'd it out in the beginning, it still brings it up. So make sure after every time you guys process your audio, add an EQ at the end and remove any unwanted low end. It may seem insignificant on one sample or two, but if you think, I have here about maybe like 35 layers, all that together can really add up and then muddy up your mix, and everything just kind of sounds flat. The dynamic range isn't there, so just make sure to add your high pass filters on the kick drums. You don't need to go too high. You shouldn't really be passing 30 hertz. And then I'll show you where you cut off your other components of your tracks. So that was the low. I just made sure to cut anything past 30 hertz. And then for the mid-range, all I did was just put an EQ where I only focused on the mid-range. So you see here my EQ is just on the mid right here. Depending on how bright you want your kicks to be, you can open this up more. You can have it here all the way out. Up to you. It's really all about preference. And you honestly experiment with it too. Then I just added some more effects to kind of bring it out, give it a little bit of stereo width. And then again at the end, because this is a mid-range part of the kick, I made sure to cut out all the low end. I did leave the high just because after cutting it off initially, there wasn't a lot of high end to begin with at this point, and it just worked, so I just let it be. And then for the last part, for just the transient, just to kind of bring out the transient, let me unfreeze this track. Very simple. I just filtered out everything with an EQ, added a quick distortion, For any native plugin, not plugin, any native Ableton distortions, you have usually overdrive is really good. I like to use that one a lot too. Erosion is good. Sometimes it does not work as how I like it, so I just kind of end up defaulting to overdrive. I mean, not overdrive. Sorry. What is it called? Oh yeah, sorry, overdrive. Yeah. And then honestly, if also one other great distortion is amp. Be careful with it. Sometimes it doesn't work well either too, but in some cases, if you use it forgivingly and humbly, it does actually add good character, especially if your kick drums are on the like low and muffled end and you just need to add a little bit of more highs to it. An amp can really help. And to be honest, there's no really good way of, no, I'm not saying good way, but there isn't really a right way to process things. There are certain fundamentals you should follow to make sure it's clean and to make sure that you have no issues down the line once you get down to the arrangements, automation, mixing, and mastering. You really want to be able to keep an eye on these small details like the low frequencies, anything between, I would say, around 100 to 200 you want to be careful about. If you have too much in that region, it can also start to muddy up your mix. So, and then for the groove kick, honestly, I just bounced the kick drum into another track, filtered it out, freeze and flatten it, and then what I did is I shifted it about a 16th note forward. So if you look here, this is a quarter note right here, and you can see that the groove kick hits right at the 16th before the next kick hits. And all together, it sounds clean. One quick before we move on to the next. If I move that transient, sounds flat, not clear. If I move the mid, flat, and then you have your original kick drum. So that was the kicks. If you're starting to make, honestly, any type of EDM, especially when it comes to genres like house and techno, the kick drum is really the foundation of your track. It really does set the mood. You go with an aggressive kick, you're going to have an aggressive track. You're going to have a soft kick, you're going to have a more melodic, more progressive type of track. So really make sure whatever genre you're trying to go for, go find artists, your favorite artists, and listen to their tracks. Really dissect them. Listen, like, especially when you're starting to learn how to make your own music. The first thing you're gonna want to learn is the kick drum. So find a bunch of your artists and listen and just focus on. Okay, they're using a soft kick here. They're using a hard, aggressive. They're using a very low kick. Because initially when you start, you want to make music like an artist. And then once you have experience, then you start experimenting and trying to find your own type of sound. And that's when you can start taking what other artists have done and try and make it your own. So, little tip, that's the kick drum. Rumble I won't get into right now just because it'll take too much time to kind of explain, and if I don't explain it right, it can confuse a lot of people. So just a quick, rumble is basically just the sub frequencies to really give you that power. So whenever you go to a club or a festival, this part of the track is what you feel. It's the very low end of the spectrum where you don't really hear it well, more about feeling it. So this is the tricky thing about rumble. Because it's hard to hear, it's very hard to gauge if you're overdoing it or if it's too weak. You can still hear it, but if your room isn't properly treated or you just don't know what to look out for, you could really lose a big character. You can really lose the power and the drive behind the kick drum. Just to kind of explain, I'll just do a quick loop for you guys to see the difference between what what a rumble does for a track. So by itself, the kick, like we listened to, you have this, and then I add the rumble. It's just that it's hard to hear unless you have headphones on. If you have headphones on, you can really hear the low end. But basically, it's just adding a little bit more character to the kick drum, so it's not a flat, simple hit. Now, you don't have to have rumbles. Some people or some artists, instead of using a rumble like this, what they do is that they can create a bass line groove, and then you just have the kick like I made, and on top of it you'll have your bass line with all the sub there. There's different ways of doing it. But at least for this one, this is more like industrial warehouse type techno. A lot of these artists use this method of rumbling, and there's plenty of YouTube tutorials on how to achieve this. Many different methods, and honestly, you just kind of got to experiment and see what works best for you. The next thing is we're going to do is the rolling bass. What that is, it gives that driving force to your track. It can really make your track sound 140 BPM when it's really at like 130. Now what it is, it's usually just a pluck sound, and the pluck is at 16th notes. And then what you want to make sure when you're doing this, you grab a plug, really short, really fast, put a line of 16th notes, and just give some variation in the velocities here. That's all you want to do. You don't want to give this groove. What groove is just variation on when the notes are played and how the velocity is. You want to keep this consistent. What I tend to do is I have about 1 to 2 bars of velocity variation, and then I just copy and paste it all throughout. I don't want it changing too much, because then it kind of just everything seems messy at that point. Just keep it 1 to 2 bars at most, copy and paste, and then move on. You really want to be able to work efficiently on this. And you can see here too, what I've done is I like to layer. Problem is that when you just use one sample, it sounds somewhat generic, just because most people would have the same plugins, the same presets. So really, to like get a different feel, a different vibe, it's great to layer your sounds. EQ them, play around. Maybe you want one layer to be the very high end, one to be the low or the mid. And so let me just show you what this is. Let me do that. Hold on. Here. So you can hear it. Just very short notes back and forth. And so by itself, so if you listen carefully, you can actually hear both layers. One layer is here. You can hear how thin it is. It's very light, but it's more on the higher end. And then what I did is I added another layer. This is more full. It has the high and the low. And you can see when this doesn't have a lot of, this one I have 2 layers. One is more of a stereo, very wide, but filtered out on the high end. The second one is more of a mono. I made sure that it was kind of in the center to kind of give a whole the whole stereo width. So you have the sides and the mid at the same time for this, and then together. Now it sounds really wide. And then I did some processing on these, nothing too crazy. When it comes to processing on your sounds, keep it very simple. Honestly, like you can see here, I'm only using a filter, a delay, and a distortion. And then on here, it's exactly the same processing. I just changed the sample. And then the final touches, I used a glue compressor. And what a glue compressor does, Ableton has its own native one. Basically, it just makes it what it sounds like. It literally glues the 2 different sounds together. And this is where we come into the topic of dynamic range. And what that is in short term is basically how much difference you have between your lowest peak of volume and your highest peak. The bigger the difference, the higher the dynamic range. The lower, the smaller the dynamic range. And this is where you kind of have to find a good medium between the two. If you have too much, then your mix sounds weak. Your lows could be too low or too high, and then, other way around. You really want to find that good medium, that good balance. A good way to to look at this would be to take a track from a genre you want to make. It could be anything. Put it into Ableton. Make sure you input the right BPM, and then upload the upload Ableton's EQ8. And if you press this little triangle right here, it opens up this bigger display of the sound profile of all the frequencies. And if you look, so now you can see where this part of my track sits. It's sitting in the mid range where I want it. So what I would say, grab a track, throw this on there, and just see like how high how many dBs does the low end go? Is it up to 6, 12? And then also check how high does the high end go. You really want to see darker tracks tend to focus on the lower end, while more brighter melodic tend to focus on the mid and highs. So yeah, look into the glue compressor. Really does help in making sure that your multiple layers just sound like one layer. Then I just did a few processing with EQing, filtering, and again, more distortion. And then last but not least, I added a filter. This filter over here is more for automation. That's for automation, basically, where I'm changing the filter as the track progresses, and that comes way later on. So right now we're just focusing on the components you should look into. So we've just went over the kick drum, we went over the rumble, and we went over the rolling bass. Some key takeaways: layer your sounds. You can really get some awesome sounds if you layer them. The rumble, you would have to do your homework, honestly, and really how to process low end. And then for the rolling bass, like I mentioned, make sure to use a fast, plucky sound. You can have 1, 2, or 3 layers, just depending on how it sounds. Personally, I like to use 2 to 3, but most of the time it's 2. 1 is the more stereo rolling bass, and then the second layer is the more mid-range that kind of sticks more into the mono field. And so altogether, it really just kind of brings up a driving force. So right from the get-go, it's moving. If I remove it, see, it sounds kind of stagnant, kind of slow. I bring it in. Now there's some speed behind it. There's energy right off the bat. And that's it. It was just 3 layers, and it's already like having a driving force. So those are the 3 main components you really want to be able to hone down and kind of at least get it right, especially because these components are really the fundamentals of at least warehouse techno. It really brings out the energy, the power of the track. Yeah. And then next, the 2 easiest one, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, is just the atmosphere. So when you're working on your track, you kind of have to think of it in a 3-dimensional sense. You have your left and right speakers. Obviously, when you're more in a festival club setting, they will use mono, but at least if you're going to be releasing music online, Spotify, you want to produce it with an idea that you have not just one component of where it goes from 0 seconds to 7 minutes, but you also have, as the track progresses, you have components of your track moving left and right. So you're thinking in almost 3 dimensions on how you want to place your sound to the left, to the right, It really keeps it interesting. It doesn't make it sound stagnant, especially for techno that's 7 minutes long. The art of it really comes from putting people into a trance. And by the way you do that is that you're using a lot of repeating sounds, but to keep them interested, you're changing those sounds. You could be adding little ear candy percussions here, maybe on the left, maybe on the right. You could be adding, panning where the sound is moving left to right. And the other big factor is going to be the atmosphere. So what the atmosphere is basically I'll give you a listen. That's it. It's literally just a minor chord. I believe this track is an F minor, so it's an F minor chord. And right off the bat, you can hear it. You hear it more in the more stereo field than you do in the mono. And this is just to kind of give it some space, to kind of make your track feel like it's bigger, that it sits in a large room. And usually for the atmospheres, you want to use, you can use minor chords, major chords, depending on what type of vibe you're going for. And I try to use pads, or what I do if I don't want to use a pad, I want to use like a lead or something. I would throw the preset into the track, and then I would put a lot of reverb on it. Careful not to put too much, because then you lose it. And then make sure, especially with the atmospheres, to cut off the low end, because if you just have that playing consistently, you can see that it's playing throughout the whole 7 minutes of my track. And it's just like a very spacey, dreamy, high end. Nothing too crazy on the processing. I literally just EQ'd it and then reverb. And then I added a second one. This is to kind of take the mid-range. Like I said, really layer your sounds. Have fun with it. It's really fun layering, because you end up with a sound like you would have never gotten by just playing with one. And this one you can actually hear that as I played it, it grows and opens up and gets brighter. So by the time I reach my ninth bar, it's already open. So it actually really helps in building the tension. So together, and there you go. You have a very bright, melancholy, setting the vibe for your track. And then all together, you can hear it in the back. It's very faint. You don't want it to be too in your face. You just want it in there in the back. Something that you wouldn't notice is there unless you really pay attention for it. One thing I also did add on here, I added this vocal just to kind of give it more groove. I had a sample where this voice just kept repeating. I put it into Ableton's drum rack, where I can just use MIDI notes to play whenever I wanted to. And then I just added echo, reverb, and then EQ. That's it. One thing to note, Ableton, depending on which one you get, most of the time people just end up going to this standard reverb. But there is another one. If you go to your Max for Live and search up, let's see if you go to Max Audio, they have this one right here, Convolution Reverb. This one's an amazing reverb. I believe it comes with all of Ableton's, I think Sweet and Light and all of them. So really look into these, into the Convolution Reverb. It actually sounds really good. The difference between the original reverb that I just showed you, that one tends to be more of like a hall reverb, where it kind of gives you just more warmer, more clean reverbs, which is great for your atmospheres, just to kind of give it some character. Convolution reverbs I really do like to use on my synths, my percussions, just because it kind of gives you more of a little bit of a aggressive reverb and it really brings out characters of the audio that you're trying to play with. For this one though, this vocal snippet, I just used a standard reverb. I didn't want it to be too out there. Had it repeat. And one thing I have, this is a plugin, but this is basically what it does. Is that you see what it does? It ducks the volume. That way, it gives this track a little bit of change over time, so it doesn't sound so stagnant. You know, so in extreme cases, you can go like this. But you see how it sounds kind of weak, so I kind of, to keep it there, I would have it around here, maybe 50%. One other method you can use, if you don't have this, go to your audio effects, go to your compressor, and what your compressor has, it will do the same thing that I just showed you. You go to your sidechain, click sidechain, and right here where it says audio from, I am going to sidechain it to my kick drum. Now if you look, when I press play, that audio file right there is my kick drum. That's playing. So when I push it down, you can hear the the vocal ducking, where the volume drops right away when the kick hits. So the kick is gonna hit, the volume will drop on my vocal, and as the kick ends, the volume on the vocal comes back up. So without it, and with it, this can really give you some groove on your tracks too. You can use this on your rolling bass, you can use this on your drums, on your synth, your pads. You should generally use them slightly, because you really want to make sure that your kick drum does have room to breathe. So go on YouTube, look up how to put how to sidechain your synths, your melodies, your harmonies to your kick drum. Learn the tips and tricks. Don't overdo it, otherwise it can really destroy your sample. Like how you notice when I kind of overdid it, it sounds weak now. If I just kind of brought it up, it's ducking, you can hear it, but the volume is almost there. And worst comes to worst, if you can always just up the volume gain slightly to bring it up more. So that was like the core of it. You can see that's what I use mainly on my intro. Next, what we can go over, let's see. We'll just quickly go over the drums. I'm not going to go too in depth just because there's a lot. When you're making techno, you're going to have your open hats. You know, I just put it on every offbeat. So kick hits, then the hi-hat hits. So if we look closely, kick hits, and then so you have 1/8 note where the kick is hitting, and then the next eighth is where the open hat hits. If you see how there's two MIDI notes here, that's because, like I said, I layer my everything. I try and layer everything just to get a new sound out of it. And same methodology as I've been saying. Keep an eye on your low end. Play around with all the effects that you have, depending if you're using FL or Ableton. Play around with it, see what kind of sounds you get. If you like it, great. If you don't, it doesn't hurt. You just take it off and move on to the next. For this one, I just distortion, EQ. Then I brought in the glue compressor, like I mentioned, to make sure those two sounds work well together. There isn't too high of a dynamic range, because what I did is that I had one hat that was a high end, and one that was kind of like more in the mid range. And I just kind of used the glue compressor to squeeze them together and make them sound like one sound. And always ended with an EQ. That's pretty much for the open hat. Honestly, sometimes this is just 2 samples. There's been times where I've used 3 or 4, maybe I think once even 5. Really depends what you want to go for. If you want them to be really hard hitting, you add more. If you want them to be soft, 1 or 2 at most. And then when you're adding these layers, it's not just like you add them on, layer them up, put a glue compressor, and that's it. No. You gotta think really systematically on when you layer your sounds. You know, I want one sound to be the high end. I want one sound to focus on the mid. I want one to be the transient, a very clicky open hat. Layer them all together to get a very pronounced and very clear hat. And this applies to every drum percussion that you will be using, even plucks, synths as well. Don't just go into your track without a plan. It's good to experiment. It's good to try new things, but try and have an end result. Try and have a goal. Experiment, but don't experiment without knowing what you want to do. There's some cases, and I'm not saying not to do that. I'm just saying at least when you're working on a track like this and you want to get it done, have the idea in your head and slowly work your way towards that idea, trying different things. And the main reason is because when you're making a track, you don't want to put too much time in just sound designing, because what happens is that takes up so much time that you kind of lose that drive, you kind of lose that motivation to make the track, and you kind of get lost in the world of sound design. Do a little bit of sound designing when you're making your track. Don't spend too much time on it. This entire track, 7 minutes, 30 different tracks on here. I finished it in less than 24 hours. I started this on Friday and I finished it by Sunday morning. Honestly, I want to say maybe like 12 to 15. When you're starting off, it's going to take you a long time. My first track that I ever made took me 3 months to finish, and it wasn't even that good. As you make more songs, you learn what you work best at. You create a workflow for yourself, and then you just get better at that and keep building it. But like I said, if you want to sound design, just have a day where you sit down, throw a bunch of random sounds in there, a bunch of random effects, and make a happy accident and see what you get. Sometimes, in my opinion, 90% of the time, you're not going to get anything really good if you're just playing around. But, you make a million mistakes, but then there's one that you just get right. Save it, put it into your folder, and that's your sound. Now, from now on, when you use it in your tracks, that'll be associated with you because you made that. And it's going to be very hard for someone to recreate that. And it's fun. It's honestly fun when you're trying to sound design because you never know what you're going to end up with. Sometimes also when you're making tracks, challenge yourself a little bit and say like, all right, I'm going to make an entire 3, 4, 5 minute track with nothing but sounds that I made. I'm going to make my own hi-hats, my own synth leads. If you do that, it can really accelerate your progress because you really tend to focus on that one aspect and get it right. So on to the next. So you have your open hats, then you'll have your shakers. I have two layers of shakers right here. Very simple, nothing special. This just kind of sat in the background. I didn't want to spend too much time on it. I just threw a saturation and a distortion on there to kind of bring it up a little bit because it was very low originally. EQ'd it out the low end and just turned it down a bit so it wasn't too in your face. And then I moved on to the next. I didn't really spend too much time on this. Kept it very simple. You can even hear it. One is low, the other is high. Like I said, it's all about those layers and those frequency ranges. And you can, like I mentioned with all my other ones, throw a glue compressor on the group, make sure that the dynamic range is good. Percussion, this is just a ride. What I did with this one, I actually put this side chain, how I showed you earlier, instead of having it hit every time like that. It was a little bit aggressive, but I did like the tail end of it, so I just added it to I just filtered out basically the attack and kept the body, so altogether it would sound like this. It's still a ride, but it's a ride without an attack. It's just this is where your creativity comes in. Try new things. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works. And then here, this is just another open hat, but it has, I kind of just added a reverb on there to give it some space. So when I add it with my other ones, yeah, it's kind of off if you notice. It's not. See, it's like a 16th note right before, and you get this nice little groove. So all together. And that's been pretty much my drums. I just use that throughout the whole track. I just copy and paste. It's a good idea when you're making your tracks to add markers. So here you can see, at least for in the beginning, I just put an F minor just to know what key I'm in. So if I ever want to come back to this, if I want to make a remix of this, I just know right away, oh, it's an F minor track. I add, I know where the break is. I know where the first drop is. I know where the chorus is, the verse, where the breakdown is. This makes your workflow so much easier when you're organized. Can't stress that enough. It makes a world of difference. You can see how every aspect of my track is grouped depending on category. I have my atmospheres. I have an atmospheric vocal, my kick drums, my rumble, rolling bass, my drums, vocals, etc., stabs, harmonies. Just stay organized. Honestly, if you start off doing that in the beginning, it's going to become second nature. Like, you won't even be able to make a track without keeping it organized. And color code. I like, figure out how you like to color code your tracks. For me, atmospheres are always white, kick drums are always red. Right away, you can just open my track and I know exactly where everything is. It makes the arrangement part super easy, super fast, and it makes the automation and gain staging part easy as well. So by the time, the hardest part for me is really getting the idea together. Once I have that done, everything else just kind of falls into place. Really focus on your workflow, stay organized. Even with your sample packs, make sure you label everything, you know where they are. Keep it organized. You don't want to waste your time looking for samples. I mean, you will have to dig around sometimes because there's a lot, but at least if you're looking for something specific and you know where it is, you can easily find it. Okay. So we went over that. I will go over the vocals last because I'll try and go in a little bit more depth. I'm going to go over the leads and harmony right now and what I did. Let's see. So for my first lead, so I just took a preset. Took off all the initial, because a lot of presets tend to have pre-made effects on it. I took those off because I wanted to add my own. First thing I did is I EQ'd out the low end. I didn't need it. This is just going to sit in the mid to high range. And then I just added a saturator and distortion to bring it up. Quick example, like if I take these off. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry, yeah. and then I add it in. So you see how this saturator kind of gives it a bit more of a low frequency feel. Sounds thin, brings a little like the timbre down, and then bring a decapitator to kind of bring it back up with that saturation there. And then actually, you know what? I think I did use the effects, the initial effects on here. Yeah, there's a delay on here. So it just has a delay. I believe it's just 16th notes. When it comes down to writing your melodies, it's honestly, it's just experimentation. Definitely learn music theory. Definitely learn music theory. Learn how to make a minor chord. Learn how to, add a seventh and add a ninth. Learn how to make a minor scale arpeggiator. It's better than just going aimlessly into this without having some sort of music theory background. I'm not saying background, but like some music theory knowledge. And YouTube is your go-to place. Everything is on there for you. Plenty of people teaching. And this is just minor chords playing triplets back and forth, back and forth. This goes up and down throughout the whole track. It will sound boring if this is just playing as is, but that's when you get into the automation where you start adding effects, you start filtering out to kind of give it some change over time, panning, like I said. Or you can play with the octaves. Level one. Move on to the next. So all together, just real quick. So that's your main lead. That'll be your main lead. That's where, it'll be in the verse, it'll be in the chorus, or, however you want to play it. In the chorus, I have this small like melody that I just kind of played around with. It's just brass, playing a simple melody. So if you kind of listen to the initial one, that's just a minor scale. Yeah, that's it. Like that. And so this, it doesn't stand out, but it just plays in the background. It just kind of gives it more of a motion. Sometimes, honestly, when you're making a track, not everything has to be heard. At least not on your phone or your speakers. Maybe when you go to a music festival and they have an enormous sound system, you'll be able to notice these things. But at least, it actually, like, subconsciously, it adds to the feel of your track. If sometimes you can't even hear it. See, I mean, if I didn't point this out, you probably wouldn't have noticed it. You might have noticed it when it plays those high notes, but see, that's where it gets you. Like, the low notes might not be as prominent, but at least maybe the high ones will peek out, and that's where it starts to grab your interest. And this is where you kind of start adding a little bit of variation in your tracks when you kind of add these little Easter eggs for your listener, and that's how you kind of grab their attention again. Because I can be playing for like a minute the same thing, but then once I add this, if they're listening and paying attention, that's when you grab their attention back. Especially with techno, because it's a very repetitive and long track. You want to make sure you can keep your listeners interested. For this, I just EQ'd it, distortion and reverb. If you want to listen to it without the reverb, is how it sounds. So you can hear a delay on there just to kind of give it some tail end, and that tail end is going to feed into the reverb just to kind of keep it bright over a longer time. So you're giving a short a short audio clip, uh, almost like a sustained note using reverb. But it gives it also dimensionality when you add that. So with the reverb, so now you kind of get like a whole, now it's filling up 3D space I was talking about. It sounds ominous. It sounds eerie. So it really adds to your track's emotion. So that was that part. And then we have only 10 minutes, so let me just go over the vocals. Actually, let me go over the harmony too, because personally I love making these harmonies. It's so much fun. Let me see. So I'll just play the track and we'll just give it a listen. So, personally, I love breakdowns, mainly because you have so much space to really play around and really set the mood and just give it a lot of emotion, a lot of fun, to be honest. You know, really, like, you get to, this is my favorite parts of the tracks are always the breakdowns and the build-ups, because that's when you can really, like, get your audience to pay attention, to build that anxiety until the drop comes. And this takes practice too, because, you know, I still haven't gotten it down. Building up that tension is, there's a learning curve to it. You know, you want to be able to build the tension, but you also don't want to build it too much or too big where you're starting to take away energy from your drop, because your drop is where all your power is coming from. Your breakdown and build-up is where all the tension comes from. There's a big difference between power and tension here. Just keep that in mind. That's why what I tend to do when it comes to this part, the build-up, I tend to start filtering out the low end of all these tracks, so that when my drop comes and it hits, all the low end is right there. Yeah. So quickly to break it down. I have my low notes, very wide, basic sawtooth synth, playing notes. I did add a reverb on there. Usually people say not to, but I like to. It sounds great. If you do it right, it shouldn't matter. And then I just have this drum. This one I keep untouched. I don't put a reverb on there, just to kind of support the synth I have on top. And I kind of always like to use like almost like a hum, like a very low hum on these kinds of breakdowns. Just it gives it like if you're going for a dark feel, this kind of gives it that, really supports it. So together, in my opinion, they complement one another well. And that just, I just have long notes, 1-bar notes, playing, building tension, slowing down the energy, giving people a second to rest, collect their thoughts, and really pay attention to what's about to happen. When you're creating a track, really think about how how your listener is going to react to this. How do you want them to react? Do you want them to like focus? Do you want them to not, so you can use it as a transition? Up to you how you want to play it. Some people create tracks just for their intro. You know, they have a really long intro where nothing happens and all of a sudden their track hits. Other times they just go straight into it, like hard hitting, you know, everything in your face at once. So, you know, just think about what you want your track. Do you just want it to be something you play in the middle of a set? Do you want it to be a track that, you know, they're bringing down the energy, they're bringing up the energy? Because you don't want to have a track that doesn't have a purpose. Because then, if you want artists to play with it or like to use it, they're not wanting to because it doesn't serve a purpose for them. So just have that in mind. Don't let it dictate, but you know, just have that in mind when you're doing your arrangement. And then secondly, I have these sounds, just kind of like an ominous feeling. I just got like they have free packs. I got a free cinematic packs that they use for movies and productions, and I just threw it on there and I just loved it. And then this one, similar sound, slightly changed a few. I think I just put it on a different note, so when they both play together, one's playing a high note, the original key of the note, and the other one's playing an off note. It gives it a very like unnerving feeling. Yeah, and at least and then also my the harmony comes from my atmospheres. Sometimes you can use a whole different set of sounds, but it's ideal to kind of also keep your tracks simple. I'm not saying not to, but you'd be surprised at how many of your favorite artist tracks are so simple. You'd be very surprised. I know some big artists who've played at EDC where their tracks are only 12, 14 layers and that's it. You know, and it has hundreds of thousands of listens. You know, like, and that really shows you how skilled you'd have to be using the least amount of resources and making the best quality tracks out there. So be careful when you're starting off making tracks. Don't go overboard, but it's okay in the beginning to kind of do that because it's easier to take away sounds than it is to add more down the line. So go ahead and throw it on there, see what works. If you like it but not sure about it, just keep it there. Turn off the volume, save it for later. You might want to use it again. Experiment, try new things. We're almost out of time. Layer your sounds. Look into it. Go on YouTube. Go on Reddit. There's a great Reddit community for all genres of EDM. There's one for techno, house, everything. There's challenges that these groups have where they'll give you samples. You can post your track on forums and get reviews. Also look for other people who have produced. You can really advance your skills if you find a mentor. You know, you can go what you'll take learning in 3 years, you can really condense down to one if you can find a good mentor or a friend, or even a school. I attended a Beat Lab Academy for 8 months, and honestly, that accelerated my music production way beyond what I was when I started there. If it's something you're serious for, if it's something you want to hobby and have fun, by all means go and do it. You know, learn, enjoy it. Don't be too scared to experiment. Sometimes you might think these two sounds won't work together, but if you know how to play around with the synth, play around with your effects, you can really make something new, and that's what really gives you originality. Yeah, So it looks like we are running out of time. Thank you everyone for attending, and my name is Resonance. My Instagram is real_resonance. Please support. All the help is great. I'm more than happy to help anyone. If anyone has questions about production, feel free to message me on Instagram. I'll be more than happy to do what I can. And yeah, thank you. Have a good one, everyone.